White text over video of past events. Logo, Chicago Cultural Accessibility Consortium. Professional Development Series presents Funding Accessibility. A large room brightly lit. In front of one wall is a long table where 4 people sit. A seated audience faces them. To the far left of the table is a screen with projected slides and captions. Between the screen and table is a podium where a woman stands and addresses the audience.
Hey everyone, I think we're going to get started. Thanks for all being here today. Just a few announcements. First of all, of course, we want to thank Access Living for hosting us and having us in this wonderful space. I don't know if there's any representatives from Access Living here, but as you pass them on your way out, tell them thank you. And then, of course, we also want to thank Equip for Equality and Kathy Rajan for our captioning. That's very much appreciated. And then, of course, our panel. I think we're all very much interested in hearing what they're going to have to say today. So what I'm going to do is just a very brief introduction, basically their names and where our panel members are from, and then we're going to jump right into it. The panel members will give you more information about what actually they do and why we thought it was important for them to be here today. So first of all, to my left is Hilary Odom. She is the Senior Advancement Officer for Chicago Shakespeare Theater. Next to her is Evan Hatfield, the Director of Audience Experience at Steppenwolf Theater. Next to Evan is Sarah Breen-Bartecki, the Vice President of Conservation Funding Initiative at Brookfield Zoo. And next to Sarah is Suzanne Connor, the Senior Program Officer from Chicago Community Trust. So we are going to get started with Hilary, who's going to give us an introduction to the world of development. The panel members have all agreed that if you have burning questions during their little talks, please feel free to raise your hands. We have a microphone that will be brought to you, and we'll take questions as they come, but we've also allowed time at the end for questions. All right? Hilary.
Thank you, Lynn. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. So my task for this afternoon is to provide a very general overview of the function of a development department. And my aim is not to tell anybody how necessarily they should be raising funds, but more so to facilitate a productive dialogue, hopefully between program staff and development officers, or sometimes people who wear both hats, maybe an internal dialogue. And also perhaps a productive dialogue between your organization and the funding community in terms of how you can build a strong case for support for the fantastic work that you all are doing. So a little bit of background on myself. I manage the corporate foundation and government partnerships for Chicago Shakespeare Theater. I've been in that role for 4 years now, and before that I was at Steppenwolf Theater Company, where I was also assisting on the corporate foundation and government fundraising team. So in total, I have a little over 7 years of experience directly in fundraising, and my background before that has always been fed by a love of theater and the performing arts. So this is work that is very near and dear to my heart, and I take a lot of personal fulfillment and satisfaction about bringing my skills to be able to support the incredible art making in this community, and also the unbelievable thoughtful programs that have been developed by wonderful and wise individuals like yourselves to open the doors of access to those programs. So jumping in, I just wanted to introduce your trusty organization development officer. This is maybe how you perceive us. Sometimes we might be tucked away in an office somewhere, and hopefully dollars are just raining down on your worthy programs. But the fact is that we play many parts in our role as a development officer. We can be researchers, which can mean that we are constantly inquiring about the programs that are happening within our organization, or we're looking at research in the wider field and how it might relate directly to the work that we're doing. We are storytellers. We are looking at how we can take the information that we are given, a wide berth and diversity of information, and sum it up into the most compelling story for a particular donor or audience that we are interested in engaging in our work. We serve as a spokesperson. So we are representing your programs and your work in public forums. And in a related way, we also serve as advocates for the work that you're doing. So not only are we out in the community trying to generate support for your programs in terms of contributed revenue, but we're also raising awareness of the programs that you are creating. And finally, we are matchmakers. We are trying to create authentic, long-lasting, and meaningful relationships between donors and the program staff and the artists that are creating this fantastic work in our cultural organizations. So one of the things in order to build these relationships that we have to consider is donor motivation. What is it that inspires a donor to make a gift to your work? And that is key to building a strong relationship. So in the interest of a very broad overview of what that might look like, I've sketched out some of the key donor groups and some of the thoughts that we keep in mind whenever we're communicating with those donors in terms of what might motivate them to make a gift. So at the top level, we have our board members. They are your biggest fans. They want to be involved in the work that you are producing in your artistic and cultural realm. They want to be involved in the community work that you're doing. And they are excited about all the aspects of your organization. They have, therefore, a personal and a professional investment in their service as a board member because they're also using this as a leadership opportunity for themselves to serve on behalf of your organization and community, which is, once again, a civic leadership opportunity. So they are expanding their networks. They're also advocating among their networks for the work that you're doing. Your board members are your best friends. And so you really want them to have an accurate picture of the full spectrum of work that you're doing in your organization so that they can best represent your mission and your service when they are out in the community. The next group is individual donors. So when we are working to communicate with those donors, it's about an emotional connection to the work that you're producing. It's very you-centered language, for example. It's all about what that individual has done to make an impact in the community. And more we're finding that these individuals want to be able to paint a very specific picture about what their gift can accomplish. For example, it would be something like your donation of $50 allows 5 Chicago Public School students to attend a performance. And so that really helps them to feel like they're part of a larger movement while directly impacting lives of the people that they are wanting to reach. Our next group are foundations. So foundations are similar to nonprofit organizations in the fact that they also have, they're driven by a mission. And so a foundation has a publicly articulated mission. And when you're building a partnership with a foundation, it's about finding where your interests align. And so if a foundation has an interest in supporting, for example, broadening access to cultural organizations, then you would tailor a grant proposal to feature all of the ways that you do that in your work. And they are also interested in seeing demonstrated results because they are looking at the broader impact of their support in the community. So they want to understand how they're accomplishing their own mission by supporting the work of their portfolio of community partners. So they would be taking the larger impacts of all of the work that their community partners are doing to understand how the foundation is achieving its mission. And then we have corporate donors. And some of the motivations for those types of partnerships include aligning their brand or corporate values with the work that you're doing. And so you could look at something like a similar product, for example, like the health services industry in terms of access funding, might be interested in aligning with these programs because it helps to communicate to the broader community what it is that they hold true as a corporate citizen. They also look for opportunities to engage their employees because they want their employees to feel that being a part of a company can reward them in their personal lives beyond simply clocking in and clocking out every day. And oftentimes corporations, particularly since we have the benefit of being in a large metropolitan area, we have lots of headquarters here. And so corporations that have headquarters or large regional offices like to make an investment locally in the community. So they want to demonstrate to the broader audience that they are a partner here in Chicago, and that they are invested in improving lives, just like our nonprofit and charity organizations are. But overall, all of these different donor groups are interested in making a difference and feeling like they're making the world a better place. So some of the tools that are at the disposal of your friendly organization development officer in order to be able to communicate with these different donor groups include some quantitative tools and some more qualitative tools. But the important thing to remember is that you don't want to take one or the other. A lot of times a qualitative communication tool can help demonstrate the personal level of an impact, while the quantitative tool can help demonstrate the broader impact that you're making. So some of the tools that we use to tell these stories. On the quantitative side, that would be something like participation numbers. Now, participation numbers in and of themselves might not tell us a lot. For example, if we said we had 1,000 program participants over the past year. But it tells a more compelling story when we are able to provide, for example, letters from those program participants or personal anecdotes from one or two key individuals to say, here's one life that we were able to impact through our work together. And if you look at that through the lens of the fact that we actually reached 1,000 people this year, it helps to paint a more accurate picture of the total impact that your work is making. So we have other tools at our disposal. For example, I've listed partnerships here. So that means that we can, for example, through the partners that we have together in the room today, we can have a collective impact. And so we're part of a larger movement, and it helps to tell a bigger story about what we're accomplishing together. The same could be said about outreach efforts. So if you pair those together, you can say that our outreach efforts are further supported by the partnerships that we have in the community. There are also opportunities to bring the program to life, for example, through documentation in photo and video opportunities. So whenever we're trying to paint that picture, we can actually show people engaging in the work, which can be a lot more exciting than a long grant narrative, for example, written in a proposal. We could also look at published research in the field, and we can tie that to, for example, the services that we offer. So we could say that the program that we develop and the services that we're offering our constituents are supported by research in the field, so that we can demonstrate that there is a strong basis of research and support and demonstrated results that lead us to believe that our program will be successful. And then we use those tools at our fingertips to create a wide variety of donor-centered communications. So, for example, it could turn into something like a grant proposal or a report, which would be more of a narrative description of the thinking behind how we developed a program, what we expect to accomplish, and why we need an investment from a foundation or a corporation to be able to achieve what we've set out in our goals. It could be something like a story, a video story that highlights a particular impact of a program and something that we are able to bring to life by having our stakeholders tell their own version of the story and to describe for our audiences how a program that we have, that they have participated in has made a personal difference in their lives. We want our potential donors to understand on our website, for example, all the different programs that we run in order to reach into the community. And so on a web page, we might have a brief overview of a program, but we also want to provide, for example, as you might be able to see here, quotes from participants to sort of, again, help marry the overview with the personal impact. And then there are opportunities, for example, to address gathered civic leaders or an opportunity such as today. And so we can use the information that we've gathered through all the different tools that we have to create something like talking points, just a simple overview that we could give, for an example, to a board member who might be addressing an audience in an outlet that is beyond the four walls of our company. And so they would have something very easy to digest that would also help to communicate the overall impact of the work that you're doing to an audience that might not be necessarily familiar. We could also organize a site visit. I am a huge proponent of these because I feel like, particularly with the work of cultural organizations, you have to experience it to truly understand what it is that the work's accomplishing. And so a site visit is where a development officer will reach out to a key constituent and ask that they come and observe your program in action. We also can host special events for our donors. And so there might be a reception and a party atmosphere, which is always lovely, and providing free food and drinks always gets people in the door. But at the same time, your development staff and your program staff are all coming together in direct contact with your donor community. And so again, it's putting a face on sort of all of those numbers and concepts that might have been presented to them before, but it's really showing them in flesh and blood exactly who is being supported through their work, and it's demonstrating exactly what that work is in a way that they don't get to see in their everyday. I think that's another thing that's important for those of us who work within organizations can forget, is that we're so used to it. We see it every day, and sometimes you can forget how remarkable it is. And so having an opportunity to open up your work to your donor community is truly a special opportunity for those stakeholders. And one final example is a donor communication tool like an annual fund appeal, where we're asking people to support the organization as a whole. We're able to highlight various aspects of our programming to really bring to life the full spectrum of work that we're doing and why we function as a public charity, even though, for example, we are a theater, which some people might consider to be an entertainment venue. But we're very proud of our charitable status, and it's because we have these kinds of commitments to serving the broader community. And moving on, I just wanted to take a few minutes to focus on a couple of pieces that are very specific, particularly to my area of expertise in corporate and foundation and government partnerships. These are two pieces that sometimes can be a challenge between development staff and program staff when you are approaching them, because we might be speaking a little bit of a different language. So I hope that this section will kind of get everybody on the same page a little bit more and kind of thinking creatively about how to address these two pieces that are frequently required by funders in order for them to understand better how your program functions. So one of them is program evaluation. And this quote from Socrates is one that I keep hanging on the wall at my office, because I believe that we are constantly examining our work, and we're constantly trying to improve what we're doing and how we are being of service. And that in and of itself is a form of evaluation. An unexamined life is not worth living. Deep thoughts by Socrates. Now, in the format, for example, of a grant application, that question might look something like this, which looks very technical, but these are just different ways of asking organizations to articulate how they are thinking through their program evaluation. Something like setting SMART goals, which are specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and timely. Or an assessment cycle that looks like how you're conceptualizing your program. You plan, you implement it, you analyze it, and then you improve it. These are all models that a development officer might be presented with, but in our role as a storyteller, this is how we can take all of the tools that I illustrated earlier and put them into this format. And so it isn't necessarily it's not specifically the job of a program staff member to present all of this information in this format. What we really want to do is have a dialogue with our program staff to be able to understand how you are answering these questions already in your work, so that we can most accurately and effectively articulate the real work that you're doing and the real impact that you're making to our funding partner. And so instead of getting bogged down in what the different charts and requirements might look like, I thought that it might be a little bit more helpful to pose some questions that might help to facilitate this kind of dialogue between a program staff and a development officer. For example, what do you hope to achieve in your program? And the more specific that you can be with that, the more helpful that it is. And it's okay to be conservative. It's also okay to think big and to really challenge yourself. But it's important that your development officer understands where it is that you're planning to go with your program. And then how do you know if this is realistic? If you think that you are shooting for the stars, it's important to know that. But also if you think that you have looked at your peers in the field and you feel like it's perfectly reasonable to have 100 people attend one of your programs, then that's great to know, and it's going to help us tell a better story. And then after you set those goals for yourself, how will you know if you're on track to achieve them? And what methods can you use along the way to improve how your program operates? Basically, we just want to understand how you're monitoring your program. How are you planning to course correct if you feel like something isn't going as you originally planned? And this means that it can be something like we have program staff present at every program offering, and they're observing and they're taking notes, and then we review the notes in a postmortem after the session. I have a real-world example of this kind of ongoing evaluation process from my very own Jason Harrington from Chicago Shakespeare. So a great example of this is that Jason does the audio description for our productions. And he's constantly evaluating his performance because he checks with all of the participants before the performance begins just to make sure everything's good. their devices are working. And then he checks with them at intermission, not only in terms of a technical question like, can you still hear me, but also, how is the description going for you? Am I talking over the actors too much? Do you wish that there was more description? What can I be doing better? And he follows up with the participants again after the performance is over. And so he's constantly improving his practice based on direct feedback from the people who are participating in the program, which is the most valuable source of information. And then another question that might be great to think about is how your short-term achievements will contribute to a longer-term impact. So we don't necessarily want to focus just on what we hope to accomplish this year. Maybe as a team we would learn that we're trying to increase our participation by 10% this year, which is one step along the way of an overall goal to maybe double program participation over the next 5 years. And so I think in terms of context, it's important that we're able to tell the larger story in addition to maybe that specific request that we're making for one particular year. And so when your teams are approaching a project like program evaluation together, I think that it's a great place to approach that by remembering that this is your opportunity to provide the real world context for your program results. So if you don't, for example, hit your participation goal by the end of the year, it's just important to know why. What did we learn from it, and what do we plan to do differently next year? And if you far surpass your program goals for the year, then it's also fantastic to be able to communicate the exact same answers. What did you learn? Why do you think you surpassed your goal? And how is that going to change the way that you move forward? The second piece that is frequently required by funders that I think might be a little bit of a kind of a gray area, necessarily between program officers and development officers, is the budget. Now, mo money, mo problems is not a quote that I have on the wall of my office, but it is sometimes my personal mantra.
Is that also Socrates?
No, that would be in the Notorious B.I.G. I Googled it. So your program budget, just like all of your other communication tools, should be able to paint the picture of what you are achieving in your program. And so I wanted to start from there, a picture of the program in action. And there might be some things that are obvious costs. For example, a contract fee for a particular service. Or you might have a special cost for equipment, special equipment that you might need in order to run your program. A staff person that's dedicated to administering and developing your program would be obviously included in a program budget. But have you also considered how your program lives in the larger context of your organization? So, for example, if your program is designed to provide greater access to a production or an exhibition, have you included some of those costs, a small percentage that would be commensurate with the level of service that you're offering to your stakeholders? Have you communicated that in your budget? So, for example, here I've circled the actors. They're also part of the program, and there would be no program without their performance. Likewise, there are other staff who are working behind the scenes, who might be less obvious. For example, somebody who helps to build the set, or the props or costumes, or maybe somebody who's working in your administrative offices, like a marketing person who devotes their time and resource to also ensuring that your program is successful. I circled a piece of the set there. So again, it's part of the production cost that might be absorbed into a picture of what the program budget looks like. Even something like keeping the lights on. Your facility is hosting a program, and therefore
part of the cost that it takes to run a facility also are part of your discrete program. And then who is working to get all of these participants there? And what are the tools that they're using? For example, an email campaign, printed pieces that have to be designed and produced just to spread the word about your program and ensure that people are coming to participate. So basically, it's a much larger picture than what might be immediately clear just by taking a snapshot of what the action is on the day of your program. Another thing that I wanted to add about thinking through your budget in this way is that building out your program budget can allow for diversified funding streams. So you can demonstrate that part of your general operating funds go to support the program because your general operations through your administrative department, for example, are also part of the cost. It can also demonstrate where a special contribution can make the most impact, which means that you might want to frame a proposal budget to say that the funder is only supporting the direct program costs, but you want them to have the full picture of the total cost of the program. And most importantly, it demonstrates that your program is sustainable because it shows the investment of your organization in the program's success. So I have just two parting thoughts that don't necessarily fit in a bucket. But one of them is, and I chose cheesy motivational statements here. So one is to remember that your program is part of the larger mission of your organization. It isn't discrete, it doesn't live by itself. And that means that not only are your development officers advocating specifically on behalf of your program, but we can also frame how your program supports the larger mission, which means that we can be articulating the impact of your program in a request for general operating support, for example. And the quote there, I'm sure you can't read it, is teamwork. Whether we play a large or a small role, by working together we achieve our objectives. And the second parting thought that I have, and this is one that I am constantly having to remind myself of, is that it's a marathon, not a sprint. And so as much as I believe that the minute I describe what our access programs are to somebody, they should write a check. It doesn't always work out exactly like that. So working through all the different stakeholders and relationships that I illustrated at the beginning of this discussion, you never know who you're talking to. You never know what they might be telling their friends. You never know how the word might be getting out about your program and the impact that it's making. And I think that the ADA 25 initiative is a perfect example of this marathon in action, because I know that over the past several years, the Chicago cultural community has really upped the ante in terms of the commitment to inclusion and access. And I think that something like a public civic initiative supporting that work is exactly where we're trying to go. So that's all, thank you.
Questions for Hilary? Okay, we'll have time at the end, so keep thinking. Before we go on, I realized I forgot our safe place speech. So I just want to remind everyone that CCAC workshops are considered safe places. We all know we're in different places when it comes to access and inclusion. So we don't want anyone to hold back from asking a question or giving us a comment because they're afraid they're going to say the wrong word or ask the wrong question. We're all here for the right reasons and no one's going to be offended, so please ask your questions, give us your comments. Okay, moving on to Susie.
So I've been at the Chicago Community Trust over 8 years. I was at the Arts and Business Council before that. And as a result, I've really been to lots and lots and lots of arts-related events in hundreds of venues. And you'll see on the back, I put some comments that are not part of my presentation. And again, this is a safe space. I try to whitewash them as much as possible, but I put them there just to kind of broaden the thinking. So when we're talking about funding for diversity, in almost any organization, what we're celebrating with ADA 25 is the fact that diversity does mean access for people with disabilities of any kind. And so any organization that is giving money that mentions that word may not have it listed specifically, but it is a protected class. So there's absolutely no reason you should not be applying to any organization that talks about diversity. It needs to become part of the conversation within the funding community if there are those that say, oh, well, I'm not sure. We've always just covered racial and ethnic diversity. But in most instances, that conversation's already happened. Certainly at the trust, I mean, we wouldn't even be playing a leadership role here if we didn't believe that. And yet every, what month is it we post? Every January 15th, we post an RFP that is entitled Production Support to Strengthen Artistic and Cultural Diversity. And there are some cycles where we'll get, almost every cycle we get more than 60, somewhere between 60 and 80 proposals. And there are some where we get 0 that actually target the disability community, either as on-stage artists or as audience members. I'm not kidding. I find that really surprising. Now, you don't obviously have to be an organization that exclusively promotes the disabled artists. There are some, Arts of Life and others that get funded, but you can also be Steppenwolf Theater doing a performance of Cats with a deaf actor. That's part of the key. So when we talk about diversity, I think that we're not alone in understanding that we need to include disabled artists, disabled audience members. The other piece that I'll address, because it came up in some of the questions that Lynn shared with us in advance, is, how do you get your development office to pay attention to this aspect of diversity, is age-related disabilities. First of all, in Chicago, if you look at the numbers of the League of Chicago Theater tracts, which includes performing arts organizations, not just theater, about 46% of all of the audience members buying tickets, ticket buyers in Chicago are over 55. If you look at the data from organizations that are classical theater, Chicago Shakespeare, lyric opera, classical music, all the classics, that statistic really jumps. And those older patrons are the ones that are the most loyal. They're the core audience, they're the board members, they're the individual donors. And in some of these organizations, they are well into their 70s, sometimes in their 80s, and they still love the art. And they want to be there as supporters. But it can become increasingly difficult for them to navigate coming downtown, for them to navigate getting into the ladies' room in a large venue, for them to read the program if print is small and the place is dark, for them to hear if there's a lot of ambient noise. And yet they haven't grown up with the disability, so they may not be as accustomed to asking for help, advocating on their own behalf, going and, saying, hey, I need to be seated a little bit closer, I need to be out of this draft. Sometimes, but often it's more they're embarrassed by it, or they just get frustrated. And audience retention for most of the arts organizations is a bigger part of the dialogue than disability access. And yet there's a strong correlation between people getting too old to really enjoy the experience anymore and losing that person as a subscriber or an audience member. And any of the development directors in the room, including Hilary, can quote you the statistics on how much easier it is to retain the audience you have than to go out and lure in new audience members. Particularly as millennials become kind of characterized as being way more spontaneous, way more like the grazers, and not quite as interested in making a subscription commitment or a long-term investment like becoming an individual donor. So I say that more or less in response to this idea that, how do we get people to pay attention to this issue of access? I think we need to broaden in some way the discussion to ensure that it's part of every discussion about inclusion, that it's not just the burgeoning Latino audience. We can crash our system if we search for burgeoning Latino audiences. It's also the burgeoning disabled audience. The challenge is that a lot of people don't self-identify. The trust, for many of you in the room who've applied since 2006. So we have quite a back history of collecting that demographic data. The form that people like Hilary probably hate, where you have to fill out board members, senior staff, all staff, audience, and you have to check the boxes. And one of those boxes is disabled. And I'm the senior program of arts, senior program officer for arts and culture. I have seen everybody's demographic forms, and I will tell you, it's not 1 in 10 or 1 in 20. It's 1 in maybe 100 that have anything in that spot. Everybody puts 0 disabled board members, 0 disabled senior staff, 0 disabled staff, and then some kind of guess sometimes in the box about their audience. But I think in terms of authenticity, one of the things that would show the most sustainable legacy of this focus on ADA 20 is if all of our proposals started to acknowledge that those people are there. If we could not have zeros in all those columns. And then certainly as organizations are presenting proposals, if it wasn't just the access proposal that talks about people with disabilities, if that information was always included in your organizational overview. Everyone talks about how they reach out to the whole Chicago audience, especially when they're applying to trust. They always talk about how they engage Latinos, how they engage Asians, how they recruit, how they market on the south side or the west side or the whatever. Almost nobody mentions what we do for disabilities. That's just part of your organizational description. You would stand out in a crowd, no problem, just by becoming the one that regularly really does include disabled audience members, disabled board members, disabled artists. So that would be one suggestion I would have. As far as then, once you've got your, identified where you're going to apply, getting your foot in the door and rising above the fray so that people notice you really does go back to some of what Hilary said about specificity. You have to understand your point of difference. Very few foundations or corporations, and certainly no public funders, have had increased money for arts and culture. People see it as a zero-sum game, and arts and culture is very much in that position where there's so much competition for those dollars.
And so to be able to rise to the level of being invited to submit a full proposal, you know, getting to the point where we can take the time we have with a very small staff, as most organizations have one or maybe two arts and culture officers, to go out and see the work. Do the site visit, as Hilary mentioned. Part of that means being able to clearly articulate your point of difference. If you use the same line, and almost, I don't want to say everybody, but almost everybody that I'm familiar with now uses online grant applications, and most of those online grant applications require us on our end to put in a character. You know, it's not like we arbitrarily decided we don't want to read anymore. We're required to put in character in this visit. That's the way those systems are set up. And so if you're wasting characters, using superlatives, using the same language that everybody else is using, vagueness and fluff, this is a safe space, right? I can say this now. Then you're wasting characters and you're sounding like everybody else. Because frankly, I could easily crash our system searching for the words high quality arts education for disadvantaged students. Anybody who's working in CPS is almost always working with disadvantaged students. No one ever goes into a school thinking they're going to do low quality arts education. And so every single proposal, I am not kidding you, every single one says high quality arts education for disadvantaged students. Now, makes it easy if people like that, because then, like Hilary said, you can cut and paste. But people don't want to read that. They really want to see you get to your point of difference. How do you define quality? Whether it's quality theater or quality dance or quality anything, that word is so subjective. It's so coded. You know, almost any organization of color will tell you, whoa, you know, we don't want some mucky program officer telling us what quality looks like to her. You know, we really want to know, what are you trying to accomplish? What makes you, your organization, unique? What makes your project unique? But start with the organization. And like I said, one of the things that would make anybody in this room unique is if you were an organization that routinely even mentioned the disabled every time you described your organization, because nobody does that. Another thing that we look at in terms of organizational profile is, what's your track record? Can you demonstrate that you have a track record with this population or with this idea, as opposed to, oh, the money was there, I saw it on your website, we'll go after it. And here's what we think we're going to do, and if we get it, we'll do that. We need to know whether it's working with young men in the juvenile detention center or it's working with actors who have disabilities, or it's being able to engage older people to determine what is it that's becoming a struggle, if anything, for them about your facility. We need to know you've done it before, you've tried it, you have a track record with that population. So in other words, just to use the absurd example, we wouldn't want to see somebody who doesn't have any older people, period, that are going to be attracted. I mean, very few hip-hop artists are going to attract the Chicago Shakespeare crowd. So, you know, we wouldn't want to hear from that population that they're going to start to look at age-related disabilities. We want to hear from the people that already have that population and how they want to retain that population at the same time that they're addressing barriers that impact other people with disabilities, regardless of age. So we really do look, when you start to design a project, at what have you done? Do you have a collaborator? Do you have do you already have a consultant on board that's done some initial research, and now you're looking to implement some of that? Or are you just saying, we dreamed this up because we think it would be a good idea, and if we get the money, then we'll launch into it? Does that kind of make sense? We also then, of course, and I think Hilary covered it pretty well, want to see the very, smart outcomes and measures. I'm sure you've probably been to the workshops and heard these lectures before, but it is amazing to me how many people still can't say what their target is. So in other words, when you're describing your organization, say we served thousands of people, means nothing. We want to know how many people did you serve last year. If you were founded 50 years ago, serving thousands of people is certainly true, but it doesn't tell us anything. So we really want to know, give us some idea of scale. How many people did you serve last year? Do you know how many of them were disabled? Or are you just sort of taking a slice of the population and figuring that? Is there some way that you are actually partnering with an organization that can give you those numbers? How are you calculating what you've already done? And then, as tough as sometimes it is, and as scary as it might be when you're writing the proposal, we need to see what you hope to do, what your target is. So when we ask for measures, it doesn't mean number of people who visit our website and click on the link to accessibility or the link to the audio program we posted there. We want to know, what is your target number? What would success look like? Partly because it makes you think seriously about it, but also because it manages our expectations. So I often have to say, even to my board when we're funding small organizations, better that they understand the whole house is only 50 seats. 40 seats is going to be, a really nice success story for them. Than for people just to put in the measure is the number of tickets we sell. So it really is very important to think about that target population and how many is realistic. And also to think too about incremental levels of measures. So butts and seats are kind of the final, drop dead measure, the bottom line. Tickets sold, people who show up. But there are some incremental things that you can often measure that will be very informative. So that even if somehow there's a giant snowstorm united with performance and the butts and seats just don't materialize, it still gives you you've given the funder an idea that we had this many people come to our website, we had this many people click through. Back in the day, people loved all of the internet marketing because you could use analytics to see how well are you doing. Now that's become like too much trouble sometimes. I go on site visits and I sometimes know that this is an organization that sends me the exact same email every Monday from the time that the show is thought of until the time that the show is over, telling me about Metro. And I'll just ask them, so what are your open rates? And they don't know. They don't watch that. They don't know how many people have actually stopped opening those and just directed them to jump. Consequently, they aren't able to do the one thing that Hilary was talking about, which is test it, evaluate it, test it, evaluate it. And so much of this is about customer service and human behavior. And one of the cheapest and smartest things to do is test things. You can do it with email. We used to teach this when I was at the Arts and Business Council. Try a different subject line. See if that improves your open rates. You see some of the organizations that will try a message from our president. If that works once, that's great, but don't do that every time. Fundamentally, and I think Evan's going to touch on this a lot more, a lot of
accessibility is about customer service. You know, extraordinarily high levels of customer service, and much of that is unique to each organization and each venue, because art forms vary, audiences obviously vary, and the issues around your venue kind of vary. Some of you can probably read the comments on the back of that sheet paper and say, whoa, I know where she was when she heard that. Because everybody faces different challenges with the layout, the location, you know, the things that, you know, they want to enrich the experience for their audience. So customer service is a huge key, and understanding what's needed comes from listening. You know, listening to the customers, focus groups and professionally facilitated focus groups, so that you really have someone who can make people feel comfortable, draw people out, and then also, you know, relying on surveys is okay for some audiences, but not for audiences that aren't tech savvy or, you know, aren't likely to fill them out. So being able to think really carefully how to get that customer input. You know, everybody uses those kind of typical solutions, touch tours and audio describers, but there are a lot of other things that are embedded in the arts experience that you can only hear from your own customers. And part of being able to gain the confidence, I think, of a funder that you're going to be investing in something, as a funder, we would be investing in something that has a good chance of being well received, is that legwork that's been done to say, this is something we've talked to our customers about, this is something they've asked us for, we've designed it in a way that reflects their input. And then prototyping, some of you may remember, I think Leslie anyway remembers that the Wallace Foundation offered a lot of audience development workshops in collaboration with us back between 2006 and 2010. And one of them was, the speaker was Dennis Weil, who works for McDonald's, corporate VP, global McDonald's. And they have a kind of hidden warehouse place out in the burbs that is nothing but a prototype place. McDonald's, kind of, you know, fake McDonald's, except that they actually have it near an office park where they get a lot of customers that know it's there to test. They've got cameras and timers and stuff everywhere, and they test all sorts of minor changes, infinitesimal changes in the layout, the way people are directed because of putting the island with the sugar and the ketchup in this location versus moving it over to that location and changing one little thing behind the counter and putting a kiosk here. And they test these infinitesimal changes to see what it does to the customer experience, the timing in terms of getting the order ready, etc. And many of them are things that would be very costly to implement if you were going to do it globally across every store McDonald's owns. So of course they want to make sure that it's actually going to achieve the results that they had hoped for. And I think there are an awful lot of the kinds of things that improve customer service that can be tested. And the nice part about this type of work is that you can often get people who are disabled, who are accustomed to being advocates and giving feedback, and you can get less feedback sometimes initially from newer members of the disabled community who've, you know, acquired macular degeneration or rheumatoid arthritis or hearing loss, but you can engage them and get them involved in giving feedback if you are sensitive and work at it, and you can certainly get their children involved. Because I'm of that age now where a lot of my baby boomer friends have very elderly parents, that they are the primary caregivers, and they talk a lot about what a struggle it is to drop them off or pick them up or have a place where they can wait while they go and get the car. And I think that there are many of those kinds of things that can be tested, you know, where you set aside a portion of your lobby with couches and an usher, where someone can safely wait until, I mean, everybody's familiar with the concept of a cell phone line, you know, so you pull up and maybe there's somebody out there that actually texts the name of the person in, and, you know, I mean, there are a lot of things that you can try that are not costly to see if they're well received, and then be able to say to a funder, you have no, you know, we did a survey, you know, blah, blah number of people use this, but in addition to the funders, many of those people who step up and use it may be the core subscribers who will turn into donors because they see the extra effort that's being made. I can remember when Victory Gardens first instituted the large print programs, and they would just have them available, and plenty of their baby boomer audience walked in and picked up the large print program to the point where they actually put a little notice in it, please return this so we can use it again at other shows, and if you want to take one home, we're happy to give you the regular size one. And people were glad to do that. So I think that, you know, raising appreciation among many of the older people who now are experiencing some of these barriers can also lead to donors, because 70% of the contributions come from individual donors, and they are the most loyal and sustainable sources of revenue. Anybody have any questions for me now? Or almost done.
Well, we'll have time at the end, so keep thinking about those questions. Our presenters are just doing such a good job answering people's questions.
Well, you sent us a lot of questions in advance, which was helpful.
Good. All right, we're moving on to Sarah.
All right. So I am Vice President of Conservation Funding Initiatives at Brookfield Zoo, Chicago Zoological Society. I spend probably 80% of my time doing program development, strategic program development, and And I'm looking at Mark in the audience because I work with him, and he is part of a Zoo for All, which is sort of the case study I'm going to present of what happened with access and inclusion funding at Brookfield Zoo. So who are we? We're here, and we're not a theater company. We are a nonprofit, and we are one of the largest nonprofits in the city of Chicago. We are on property that's owned by the Forest Preserves. We have a sister museum, which is the Chicago Botanic Garden. They are also on property owned by the Forest Preserves of Cook County. We have 216 acres, well over 4,000 animals, 450 different species, and we are, as I said, we are the #1 visited cultural attraction in Chicago of the organizations that measure attendance. So if you've not been out to Brookfield Zoo, please do come out. You will also get to see some of our access and inclusion programs in person, and I'm sure Mark would be more than happy to show people around. I've sort of peppered this with some pictures to break things up a little bit. So you can see some of our team in action. This is Jill. She works in the Hamill Family Play Zoo with Mark. She is here. These are children who are visiting from a local organization. They're all children with intellectual or developmental disabilities. We do a lot of outreach events, especially in our Hamill Family Play Zoo. It has both an inside and outdoor area, so it's perfect for offering lots of opportunities for kids to explore in a safe environment. Okay. So the zoo has a huge commitment to access and inclusion. We have about 2 million visitors. It's gone as high as 2.3. This past year, we were just over 2 million. We estimate that of that, about 400,000 visitors have some form of disability. And we do that, we reach that calculation based on the United States Census information. And the U.S. Estimates that 1 in 5 people have some form of disability. So this also includes physical disabilities. We do a lot of stuff not only for intellectual and developmental disabilities, but also for the Wounded Warrior Project, vets that are returning. In fact, all vets and Armed Force members are allowed into Brookfield Zoo for free. Okay. So we, like many institutions, we have a strategic planning process. It's a 5-year process. It really coincides with our president, Dr. Strahl, who has been at the zoo now for a little bit over 10 years. And when he came on, he put the strategic planning process in place, and he also really made a commitment to serving everybody. And that meant, as Susie said, at first it meant serving people who were disadvantaged, who represented different cultures, different races. But in our last plan, that really expanded. And part of the reason it expanded is because we do a lot of different things, which you'll see in just a second. But first, another photo. For those of you who've not been up close and personal with a lion, we were happy during one of our annual checkups. This is our male lion. And we had a group from Misericordia that came in, and they were able to touch the lion. They're with our lead vet, Dr. Atkinson, and Matthew Mayer, who's a senior VP at our organization and has been instrumental in really growing our programs for people on the autism spectrum. It was a really special day for these kids. I can tell you, they were. It was pretty amazing, even for me as an employee, to watch them touching the lion and holding their hand up with the paw on top, and really having a sensory experience, an emotional experience that isn't part of their regular day. Okay, so what do we do? How do we know we're doing lots of things? Why did we make this a commitment? We had an internal benchmarking process, and we got to the point of wanting to do internal benchmarking because every time we turned around, someone was saying, well, I'm doing this program, well, I'm doing that program, well, I just made, special maps for people, and we realized as an organization that we had really no idea what we were doing for access and inclusion. We were doing so much, we totally lost track of it. So we brought a group of people together, and it included development staff. I was part of that group, Mark was part of that group. And we just sat in the room and we figured out what we were doing. We probably met 5 or 6 times. We had laundry lists. We did logic models. We talked about where we wanted to go, what was important. It took a long time. It took 18 months. Patience is a virtue. It goes back to you're running a marathon. It's not a sprint. And it took a long time because we discovered so many things that we were doing, because some people were implementing a lot of stuff in isolation. And we also had a key staff person who resigned. She took a different position. And so we kind of had to go back and figure out what she'd been doing. Just good reason for making sure your files are in order if you leave where you are. So we discovered that we have, and this is just a partial list, we have Zoo Camp for All. We offer Zoo Camp, but we also offer a program within a program. So we incorporate people with disabilities. They're regular campers. Our camp counselors and all of our staff have had extensive training so that we could offer an inclusive experience for people who need to have some kind of special assistance. We do these special events. You've seen a couple of pictures now. We have a long-standing relationship with Misericordia, but also with Autism Speaks and Easter Seals. And further on, I've listed a number of the places where we have relationships. We do work training programs with local nonprofits. And in fact, our work training program is one of the things that's currently undergoing a repositioning. But we have historically trained anywhere between 8 and 12 people each year through both a combination of kind of volunteering and seasonal employment opportunities. We learned, really quite by accident, that we also have a long-standing contract with a local organization that serves special needs kids to clean and adults to clean our parking lot. Who knew? We also offer all the traditional things that would enhance guest experience, noise canceling headphones, special visual schedules. Families can download maps ahead of time, plan out their day. We're working on having more quiet zones. The list goes on. So once we got, I'll put another wonderful picture with one of our animal ambassadors. So when we got everything done, I literally sat in a room with Joelle Mogerman, who is also involved in the Access and Inclusion programs, and said, okay, how do we package all these things? How do we talk to our funders? How do we make it compelling? We do all these things, they're related, they're not related. We know we want to get funding, we know we want to expand them. So we came up with a Zoo for All. And a Zoo for All is, it's something that we worked really hard at coming up with a description for the program that funders could easily understand and that donors could easily understand, even if they had absolutely no experience of their own with any kind of access or inclusion programs or with having a family member impacted. So, and we do that in all of our proposal work that we do. We really want to be able to communicate everything simply, in a straightforward manner, with all the things that Hilary is talking about, but qualitative and quantitative. So a Zoo for All has 4 components. It has the life and work skills. So that includes all of our jobs training. We're now entering into a partnership with the Southside Occupational Academy, which is a CPS public school. We'll be training 15 students each year. They will be provided with seasonal job opportunities. So we're really, really excited about that. It also covers things like Autism Network, which is a new program for teens and adults on the autism spectrum to get some social skills, opportunities for networking that will build those social skills. The life and work skills, these are the things we're doing now, but we knew we wanted to be committed to continuing to grow and enhance the programs that would be under this heading. So then we have our inclusion programs and customized programs for specific learning needs, and that's like the Zoo Camp. We were very fortunate to get a large one-time grant from CPS, which allowed us to do all the training of our camp counselors. We now have another grant from the National Inclusion Project that's actually going to let us expand on what we've done with the training to also hire somebody who's been a camp counselor and has much more in-depth experience. And that's a funder, National Inclusion Project. They fund nationally. They're not large grants. Wonderful website. They're a wonderful partner. So there's somebody that all of you can look at.
Did you say it was CPS or CVS?
The funder was CVS. The drugstore. Yes. They're a good drugstore. But we like Walgreens too. We've also piloted Saturday mornings at the zoo, which is now going live, for lack of a different term. That's a multi-week program. It's for early learners on the autism spectrum and their families, and Mark is very much involved in that program and can tell you all about it. But we were able to bring in, we've partnered with Easter Seals on that, but we were also able to bring in a new partner with Advocate. So they're working with us on that. And with so many, what we're finding is with so many parents impacted by autism and having children on the autism spectrum, these programs are being really, really well received. And it's really filling a need that's out there. And I kind of want to jump back because one of the things that Susie touched on about telling people that you have board members or staff people who have disabilities, we actually have made a real effort to find out who at the zoo fits into those different needs and to incorporate them when we can into our planning so that they're part of the process, because who knows better, right? I mean, they have the firsthand experience. So we have a vice president who has a wonderful son who has been very involved, and he's autistic, and he actually accepted an award recently that the zoo received from the governor, the last governor. The third area is, I touched on facilities, exhibits, and learning experiences. We feel for us that this is one of the largest potential areas of growth. It covers all the standard things that I talked about with the headphones and storybooks and stuff, but it also includes ensuring that all of our restrooms are ADA accessible, that we're offering, which they're not yet, but we're working on it. We do offer adult changing tables now. We have family restrooms that will be open this summer. But we want to continue that because we think that there's a lot of opportunity for incorporating the kind of signage and the kind of experiences into our exhibits and into our zoological park that will make it much more user-friendly for families and for people who have disabilities. And then the fourth area is these outreach events, and we do as many as we can. We are very, very fortunate. We have an animal ambassador program. So we have over 50 animals now that range from tamandulas to sloths to birds and reptiles, and we take them out all over the city and visit organizations. And when you're dealing with kids and adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities, animals can really provide a very special experience for them. And we've found through our programs, and this is the qualitative, but we have parents who've come back and they've said, my son could never make eye contact before. Now he can make eye contact. Or he's never been interested in exploring things or touching things. And now working with you, he wants to do these things. So qualitatively, we know we're impacting the lives of these families. And we do pay attention to the quantitative. We have the number of people we serve and all of that. And we're working on how do we find that balance across these different areas as we talk about as we grow. I will tell you, we went live with this last fall. We submitted our first proposals. And we now have 4 funders, 4.5 funders, because we have another funder that's almost committed. So I'll say 4.5 funders. So there is funding out there, there's no question. And I think for us, and here are our current partners that we have. For us, it was really about clarifying our vision. It was really about understanding what we actually were doing as an organization and where we wanted to go as an organization. We're fortunate that we have a CEO that's very committed to access and inclusion, so that helps. Here's one of our youngest early learners, and he's just enjoying a fall day out in nature. It was facilitated. To me, I love this picture. He's so peaceful and happy playing with the leaves. So as I said, we have 2 grants right now for $25,000, and they fund the Saturday Morning Autism, the Autism Network, and the outreach events. And then we have 2 foundations, one national and one local, that are funding Zoo Camp for All. I put the dollar amounts, but I put them in because I think it's important to understand that whether you're a large organization or a small organization, you have to do the same kind of legwork to get the same size grant. Just because we're big doesn't mean we suddenly get a $50,000 grant. We have to work really hard, and we have to prove ourselves to the funder the same way any other organization has to. And we do that for $5,000 and $10,000. And we're very, very happy with that. It's a tough environment out there. So there's one of our animal ambassadors. That's a 2-toed sloth. So they hang upside down. They live upside down. So yes. Yes, they do. Yes, they do. Yes, we have 2, and we hope to. We have lots of breeding pairs in our animal ambassador program, so we're looking forward to babies one day. So I'm happy to answer any questions that you have. And Mark, certainly, did I forget anything?
You got it all. This is great.
We have a really great relationship with our program staff, and I think we really work hand in hand. I mean, if they have an idea, they call me up. I'm sitting at the table from the very beginning, and I think that makes a huge difference. We've really been able to break down some barriers in the time that I've been there. I've been there almost 8 years. So, you had a question?
So a lot of this sounds like training. No, wait! So a lot of this sounds like you have a large initiative for training, which is something my organization is looking at. How do we get the whole organization not only on board, but understanding language and sensitivity and just how to work with different populations? Do you have any best practices to share when, I mean, you're obviously talking about a much larger organization than my own, but best practices for integrating everyone, no matter what job they do, and training them as we start working in these processes?
You know, it's a really good question. I think each organization will be a little bit different. Our challenge is that we have union employees, and we have a lot of union employees. So the jobs that we were talking about wanting to train people for 100% union. So we had to sit down and talk to a lot of people over a long period of time to help them understand that a program like this was not about taking jobs away. It was not about creating undue hardship on them. And it took a while. I mean, it was not a quick process. We were aided by having a wonderful partner in Southside Occupational Academy. We were able to take some of our key union staff, people in supervisory positions, out to the academy to see the students, to watch how they're trained for work at other places, to meet the leadership there. That went a long way. The program is still evolving. And Southside Occupational has a relationship with the University of Chicago hospitals as well. This is not a relationship that's just with us. They are always looking for partners. And we we found them, we're lucky. We also talked to the University of Chicago hospitals. You know, we went and said, what do you do? How are you doing it? What's worked? What didn't work? What were your biggest challenges? You know, things as simple as it was much easier for us to have staff be willing to do training when they were getting a stipend, something extra. You know, little things like that we learned along the way. If you're doing a new program like that, whether it's for intellectually and developmentally disabled or it's another audience, you have to do your legwork. You have to. I hope that answers your question.
I want to jump ahead to Evan because we're getting close on time, and hopefully we'll have some time for more questions afterward. Evan?
So it's funny whenever you get into one of those conversations where people go around the room and they tell you which Hogwarts house they would be, right? Because, you know, it turns out Hilary thinks development is clearly Gryffindor. And when I first began my relationship with development, clearly they're Slytherin. You got these donors coming in, we gotta just stay open late for them, give them some cocktails in plastic glasses, Devo officers all over the place, walking at a frantic pace, looking freaked out. But that was an earlier perspective on Devo, and I think at this point, I would say you guys are clearly Ravenclaw. With a little bit of Hufflepuff. So I do not come from the development world. I come from the front of house customer service world. I've been with Steppenwolf Theater Company for almost 10 years now. I started off working as their house manager for a handful of seasons, which means that I was the person responsible for the team greeting all of the patrons coming into our building. And over the course of a few years and a handful of the same complaints, and more importantly, the observation of just the fact we weren't extending the same welcome to the entire community that we were, you know, the core audience, it just became really clear that we need to be doing better. We need to be making sure it's comfortable for everyone coming into our space. The thing is, I'm a house manager, and that doesn't draw a lot of water at most nonprofit theater wells that I've observed. Our day will come, but and so I'm trying to figure out, all right, so we want to do better by people with disabilities. How do we go about doing that? What do I actually have control over within my tiny little world and non-existent budget? Well, I go to Victory Gardens and I hear about this thing called the Touch Tour, which is just a very simple experience where you invite an audience of blind and low vision patrons out a little bit before the rest of the audience shows up. You invite them into the theater, you talk about the play, you describe the set to them, you invite them on the set, you introduce the actors to them. And this is sounding really sexy, right? Because first of all, that sounds like fun, and most importantly, it don't cost nothing. And so I'm pretty sure I can work that angle. So I go to our production manager at the time, and I say, hey, what do you think about letting us into the theater a little bit early? We're like you're talking about, we're not a union house, which means that we are able to invite our audience in, and our stagehands don't mind showing up a little bit early. And we pull off the first one, having invited a handful of patrons out from the blind and low vision community to experience it. And it ends up being a really good time. And, you know, we went from 2 patrons for one of our audio-described performances, instantly up to 10. One through just simple outreach, but also just the customer service of it. About a year later, when we're realizing we're not doing the most service we can be for the deaf and hard of hearing community, we need to be offering this open captioning thingy. So how do we do that? Well, there's a couple of different ways. We researched it. We found out the Theater Development Fund out of New York City has this grant called the National Open Captioning Initiative. And its whole premise is to go into theaters and underwrite their captioning program for 1 or 2 seasons. During that time, it allows the theater to find and develop an audience, figure out how to reach out to them, come up with their own independent means of funding that program going forward when the relationship is over. So when it came time to apply for that grant, and man, this is a pearl for you, I went a little rogue. I did not rely exclusively on my development department to write that grant and let it rest exclusively with them. I worked in tandem with our development department. I made sure they knew what I was doing and I was getting their help. But just like any other department at a nonprofit, they've got their priorities, they're overworked, they've got a million projects that they're trying to meet. And so in the scheme of things, one more coming to them that is kind of a drop in the bucket in the scheme of things. The very fact that I was willing to do that legwork, world of difference right there. So I go and I applied for that grant. And when I applied for that grant, I got to strongly reference our strong commitment to people with disabilities as exhibited over the last year and a half through our edition of Touch Tours. And here's another pearl, man. Track your attendance. If you're not already, figure out a way to track your attendance of the people coming out who identify as utilizing one of your services. Because I got to go and look at my spreadsheet and say, well, in 2008 and 2009, we invited a total of 33 patrons who identified as having a disability out for a sign language interpreted performance or an audio-described performance over the course of an entire 365-day season. The next year, we invited out almost 100. That's a pretty good markup. The following year, as the program continued to grow, we added 100 and another 100, and then we did tribes last season, where we put on 12 performances that featured either open captioning or American Sign Language interpretation, and we're able to invite out almost 750 people from the deaf and hard of hearing community who identified as using one of those services. We wouldn't have been able to pull that off if we hadn't been doing that groundwork initially. Because only 5 years earlier, the biggest number of people who identified as being deaf using ASL coming out for a show was like 7. I'm pretty sure like 4 of them were ASL students. And it was just like this series of baby steps. And as we talk about providing what's really an important social service, and we're attaching it to this conversation about money, it's pretty easy to get cynical pretty quickly. We're doing this because it then equals these dollars coming in. And so if that's your thought bubble over your head right now, you're like, yeah, we can really work that angle. First of all, come on, dude. When you're doing all these things, please, 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 whatever you have to do to instill into your institutional mission, do it because you want to, not because you have to. There's a million different reasons for that I won't go into, but one of them is how it translates into your customer service. The hugest portion of providing services for people with disabilities is the customer service of it. Sure, there are the systems like ASL interpretation and open captioning, and yeah, those cost money. But all the best experience that we provide people is just through that customer service. Really, really recently, within the last 3 weeks, we had a patron who happens to be friends with one of our trustees reach out, and they were just having a casual conversation, like, you know what, we always have a really good experience when we're at Steppenwolf. He uses a wheelchair, he's hard of hearing, has a hearing aid. And they just said, yeah, whenever we show up, it's never a chore to get to the wheelchair accessible seats. Staff just makes it really, really easy. The thing is, if you've been to Steppenwolf, I mean, we're lucky to have the facility that we do, but that sucker was built back in '91, man, and the whole approach to design was all about compliance, not friendliness. And there was such a massive difference there. Oh yeah, we're legal. What's legal? Are you friendly? Are you easy to use? On our own, without customer service, I would argue we have a challenging facility. We have this old school style of wheelchair accessible seating where we've got 2 on the main floor of our main theater. Out of over 350 seats, we've got 2 for someone using a wheelchair. And it's in our back row, and it's kind of railed off, and it's this island. The kind of goes out into the other seating. I mean, it looks like a penalty box. We know that. We know it's not easy to get to. So man, we gotta be damn sure when someone shows up for those seats that we're making that as seamless an experience as possible. And yeah, we still blow it, but more often than not these days, we're doing it right. And so back to the story, this gentleman says, yeah, they always make it really easy for us to get to the wheelchair accessible seats. And the trustee's like, I've heard that a few times from you. And she takes that over to one of our development officers, who's always like stroking his beard, going, how can we get more money in? Benevolently, but there's some chin stroking. And he's like, well, let's set up a conversation between the couple and Evan. And so we got together just to talk about how we could do better, hear him out a little bit. And they describe the good experiences they've been having. And then they go and they say, but hey, what about this induction thing? Where do you guys stand on that issue? What can we do to get you guys to put it in induction? And I'm like, well, we've actually got one going in 2 weeks here. How do you like me now? And his entire presentation, his entire pitch just stopped. He's like, oh, well, how much is that? I'm like, it's about 30 grand. I was like, well, I'll give you 1,000. You sure you don't want to take it for a test spin first, see if it works? No, we'll guilt you into it. We'll give you 1,000. Well, thanks. The check just came in a few days ago. My Devo office reached out and said they had upped the gift to $2,500. No solicitation, anything like that. There's a bunch of morals in there. One of them is the work that we were doing 5 years ago, just trying to add a touch tour in, which was free. Being able to reference all of that and all of those numbers that then generated allow me to go to my managing director last year in budget season and say, hey, this is really important. Look at our track record. This is worth it. And I just kind of closed my eyes and crossed my fingers, and they came back and said, yeah, we'll do it. What the hell is that? I was a house manager, man. So, first of all, patience. The work you're doing now, even if it seems tiny, I swear if you keep doing it and you keep doing it well, it's going to add up. The other moral in there is just the customer service of it. And that brings me to kind of talking about how I've kind of discovered customer service in front of house to fit into the larger ecosystem of an organization. Like I said, I used to think that Diva was Slytherin, man. Like, who the hell wants to ask people for money? Like, what miserable work, right? But then it sort of clicked on me for like, all right, so we're a nonprofit. We're one of the larger theaters in town that's nonprofit. But even then, only half of our operating budget comes from ticket sales. Other half, man, we're relying on the kindness of strangers. And so I started doing the math and looking around at just our ceiling sconces and like, all right, half the lights that are on right now are on because there are these people that feel passionate enough to go and ask other people for money to do what we do. So they may be annoying, but thank God for it, right? One of my Devo officers is here right now, so if you hear the occasional like sound coming from the back row, thanks, Chrissy. And so, you know, just figuring out that, you know, it's really important to be supporting these people, and then figuring out that these accessible services we're providing, for no other reason than to make people feel more welcome at our theater, are actually really useful for them as they're trying to meet their objectives. And so, guys, track that attendance. And at the end of the season, when they ask you for that attendance, and if they don't ask you, please offer it, share that report. If you have that conversation with a patron, where they said, hey, this was amazing, thank you. Or if they send you that email, don't toss it. Go and create a new folder in your Access folder that says Access Devo, and then patron feedback. And just go ahead and stick that email in there, so that 6 months later you can go on in and be like, oh yeah, there was this one good experience. And again, that can sound cynical, but since we're doing it for the right reasons, and it ultimately contributes to us being able to do more things for the right reasons, we can sleep okay at night, right? hold on to those anecdotes. Communicate with everybody you can about what it is that you're doing, starting with the rest of the audience. So when we do an open caption performance, you're going to go into a playbill and you're going to see an insert that says, we are proud to be offering open captioning for this performance. This is the audience it serves. This is why we do it. There's a couple things for that. One of them is that one of the fears about doing open captioning is like, oh my God, the audience is going to freak out because there's like this display and it's going to be distracting, and people freak out like that when they don't know what's going on. And the second that you explain to them, hey, this is why we do it, this is who we do it for, and it gives them that information, they immediately relax. Or for the smaller population, they feel like such jerks for complaining about it that they kind of either keep quiet, or when they do offer a complaint, which is down to one a year, man, it's always couched in, hey, love the fact you guys do this. And I'm just a little distracted. Still friends. The other thing is, as anyone who's working in accessibility will tell you, the second that you do something, you start talking about people with disabilities, someone in the room is going to say, oh hey, I got a cousin. I got a son, I got a grandma, I have a friend, a neighbor, someone I went to school with. Every single time. And they're not going to open up their wallet right there, but you're going to look really, really good. And they're going to know that they can bring that person back. So then build on that a little bit. Don't just explain what's going on to the rest of your audience. Check in with the rest of your organization. And when you're doing that company picnic, or when you're in the break room, whatever opportunity, kind of suss out where people are with things. And I guarantee you there's going to be internal allies in your organization, hopefully in your development department, who relate to this in some way. I wasn't able to present to our board on what we're doing until last year. And so at that point, it was 5 years of building a program, and the opportunity came up to do a presentation. And they gave me 20 minutes, I went 25, and lots of slides I'd taken over the last 5 years. So be snapping them photos, people. Seriously, man, snap them photos. Look how sexy all that was. I mean, right? We got a slot, man. And so it was great for the entire board feeling prouder about working for the organization. Like, hey man, this is what we do, good for us. All right, we want to stay, we're still engaged. 3 trustees came up afterwards. Out of what, a group of 45 maybe? 3 came up. 2 of them visibly moved. Same exact story, man. I have a cousin. I had a sister. And you can get cynical pretty quickly here, but the fact is, every single nonprofit in the city, in the world, is trying to figure out how to keep their board members engaged. And some of them, they're on autopilot, others are like, how do we get them to be more interested? Not necessarily financially, just how do we get them to participate more? And so for those 3 trustees right there, boom, there's like instant engagement there. A couple of them upped their gifts. One of them sent his cousin, who's blind and low vision, on out for a couple of touch tours, and we started to build a relationship from that angle. And so while this does translate into like some more money coming back in, what this is also doing is it's creating this less tangible, non-financial value for the rest of the organization. Because now it's much easier for the people responsible for the board relationships to do their job. By tracking your figures and coming up with those photos and testimonials, it's making it easy for your grant writer to do that job. When it comes down to just the customer service of it, how many of you have call centers or have an organization that calls on your behalf? So 2 of you, so I'll just find you in the corner and tell you why it benefits you then afterwards. No, the short of it is we're not the only conversation when people come into a lobby that they have with the organization over the course of their trip. Because in 1 to 2 months, Steppenwolf's instance, you're going to be getting a call from our call center saying, hey, what'd you think about the show? The thing is, man, we Steppenwolf, so sometimes that's not always going to be a positive answer. So just thinking holistically, what can we do in this moment through customer service to make it as easy as possible for that call center operator, bless their hearts, to be doing their job. I think those are my greatest hits there. I think that we're pretty close on time here, if not over. We know we want to invite you to ask some questions. Clearly, all of us here can go on at great, passionate length about what it is that we do. So even if it's not right now, and like the very public, oh, that's an interesting question, scrutinizing Q&A, please don't hesitate to track us down afterwards. This is the first time I've brought cards to one of these things, so a card. Hilary brought Post-it notes. Nonprofit people. Did I miss any beats on that? Yeah.
Questions, anyone? I have a question. As an organization that's been doing Access for a very long time, how do you revitalize that for the funders so that they are willing to give money? Because after a while, they're like, oh, you've been doing this for 15 years, you don't need the money anymore, and that's not true. So that's a question if you can shine some light on it. It's a question we've been having Tropical for the last couple of years.
You've been doing it for a long time, and it hasn't generated other interest, individual donor. I mean, I think Evan's example is compelling. And so it's, I guess it begs the question, there's no give back there, no return on that investment after all the time you've been doing it?
I'm not sure, to be honest. I walked into writing the grants for this program with a new person actually being in charge of this program. So the program has gone through a lot of changeover, and I don't know exactly where it lies. I'm gonna go ask some hard questions to a couple of people when I go back to work tomorrow.
Yeah, because I think that's another thing that the development people have an obligation to report back on is, when that individual donation comes in, there may be more that Evan doesn't know about, that came in as a result of somebody's personal experience or being moved by how they see the community responding and becoming more acceptable and becoming more open and accessible. So, if it's just a case of kind of like the lottery backfill, like this is raising money and we're still going to go out and ask, eventually funders are going to start to question that. So I think that there has to be some feedback, not just that obligatory final report, but some feedback that says this is generating income and we're doing this or that with it. Not like, well, this has just become something we can get grants for, and the individual donations that come as a result of it are going back into paying salaries and light bills. That's usually what happens when funders start to look at something as either it's ineffective if it's not generating more ticket sales and more individual donations, or they're not telling us about it. So I would just ask that question. Okay.
You wear two hats in your role as a development person, right? You represent the organization, but you also represent the funders. And the thing that you just said about going back and asking the hard questions, that is one of the most important roles that a good development person plays, is asking questions that the program staff don't want to hear. They don't want to change necessarily. Sometimes they do, but they don't know how. But your questions and approaching it with gentleness and diplomacy can result in people looking at the program and thinking, maybe it needs to shift a little bit. Maybe we are too complacent. Maybe we could reach more people. But your asking the hard questions is one of the most important first steps.
And I think internally too, from the non-development perspective, you just always need to be striving to do better with your services and programs. And And so we're going into year 6 now of having been focusing on accessibility and kind of like the grand suite of things that you do, sign language, open captioning, and audio description. We've got those down, you know, and so because we've become known for it, because we've got an audience developed, I mean, there is a tendency, I think, to want to put your hands behind your heads and like go fishing. And it becomes then a chore, like, all right, how do we continue to innovate here? You know, all right, so we're doing 1 caption performance now. We've developed this audience. Do we then do 2? We've been doing 2. Do you then do 3? Do you look at new technologies? And that's hard. It's super hard.
And do you look further into the customer experience?
Yeah.
And, you know, what experience do these customers have getting here, using our restrooms, you know, being picked up outside, and all those other elements that influence somebody's enjoyment.
And that's the thing about anybody working in accessibility can tell you, man, there's always something else. And you go and you figure out you're serving this one community, and then you find out about that really nuanced like sub-community within that, and then it turns out they have like a leftist militant branch that, you know, won't come and see shows on the same night as the...
Beyond asking maybe what could be considered sort of difficult questions, but also just some leading questions to try to dig deeper with maybe your program staff about what has changed in the program over the last 2 years, or what's on your wish list. Do you have new partners this year that you've never worked with before? If you do some initial conceptualizing just to get the ball rolling in terms of a brainstorming session to understand how your story can evolve, because it sounds like the funder thinks that you might be telling the same story that you were telling 5 or 10 years ago. And so your creative challenge is to figure out what the new story is, and then you can have the conversation with the funder about where they want their dollars to go in terms of supporting if the program is evolving or changing, if there's a new challenge, so that they can understand the impact of their gift differently.
Any other questions?
Hey, I was wondering for folks who are knowledgeable in this area, as we try and be more thoughtful about inclusion, we're finding that we've got some board members and maybe some staffers who have less visible disability, but we suspect, based on behavior or requests, may have challenges, who consistently don't self-identify for whatever reason. How to have that conversation in a way that doesn't feel intrusive, but does help us more accurately understand our own community and more accurately talk about our own community. Any suggestions?
One of the things that McDonald's does, I learned a lot from this guy. I mean, they really know is they couch it in terms of the customer experience. So not asking about disabilities per se, but convening a focus group of people that may be challenged in various ways, and asking them questions that are, you know, professionally done, obviously, more focused on your experience. Starting with, you know, when you decided to come, how you make that decision, whether or not you spoke to somebody or tried to speak to a real person, with the website, blah, 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 all the way to where you parked or how you got there. And I think that that is the technique they use to elicit a lot of hidden feedback, you know, from people who don't necessarily, unless someone's helping them walk through the whole experience in a group conversation, they wouldn't just complain because they don't want to say, I have trouble with those steps or whatever it would. But I think that that's proven to be helpful, and that there are increasing numbers of professionals who know how to do that. Because there's a lot of data now in market research, for those of you that are marketers, I'm sure you know this, that show that often the customer, for the arts in particular, cultural experience, the customer experience is as much a part of the decision to
as what was on the stage.
If they didn't feel like it was a fun evening because they were uncomfortable in the parking lot, or the ladies' room didn't have paper towels, or whatever, it has nothing to do with what's on stage, but people go to arts and culture to enjoy the experience and to share it with friends who enjoy it.
I would also caution you though to make sure you talk either to your HR department or to somebody on your board who has that experience. There are a lot of lines that really can't be crossed when it comes to people being pushed into self-identifying.
There were some comments earlier about the online experience and how so much of our, maybe it was in the context of the actual grants and the funding proposals or the opportunities out there for the various organizations to find money. But from the customer point of view, what are you seeing as far as the web and online presence and the accessibility of that and how that fits into your overall customer experience?
There seems to be a common craning of necks in my direction. Web accessibility is a surprisingly hard nut to crack. If you're an organization where that's not the case, bully for you. I would say as people are getting into accessibility and providing services, I think that there's an awareness that it is on the list, but it's not going to be at the top of the list because as you're trying to fight so many other battles internally, I mean, it's hard enough to get your web guy to change a photo, right? And so, I'm not speaking for Steppenwolf, every other organization. So I think that there's like and it's one of those things that when you start down that slippery slope of accessibility, you're like, well, we're just going to offer sign language and call it good. And then you recognize captioning as a thing, and then you go further and further, and you're like, oh, it's not just about providing interpretation of the actual art, it's the entire experience.
Fade to black. White text on black background. Funding accessibility. Presented by Chicago Cultural Accessibility Consortium. For workshop resources and more information, visit chicagoculturalaccess.org. Presenting speakers: Sarah Breen-Bartecki, Chicago Zoological Society and Brookfield Zoo; Suzanne Connor, Chicago Community Trust; Evan Hatfield, Steppenwolf Theater Company; and Hilary Odom, Chicago Shakespeare Theater. Workshop accessibility: Kathy Raycan, real-time captioning. Video editing, captioning, and audio description by BridgetMelton.com. Video fades to black.